My husband's childhood friend is pregnant with my father-in-law's child. From the moment I moved in, my mother-in-law never liked me. She preferred the girl next door, Hazel, my husband's childhood playmate. Unfortunately, my husband was hopelessly in love and wouldn't listen to anyone. He insisted on marrying me. But I never expected Hazel, unable to get close to my husband, would turn around and set her sights on my father-in-law. I wasn't feeling well and had to make an impromptu trip to the hospital, but I never expected to run into someone I knew there. I stood behind my father-in-law, watching the panic in his eyes. I called his name several times without a response, and only when I tapped him did he finally hear me. "Dad, what are you doing here?" We live in the north part of the city, where there are plenty of hospitals nearby. So why did he come all the way to this hospital in the south side, and why did he look so guilty? He scratched his head nervously and looked away. I came to accompany an old man I was playing chess with earlier to get a checkup. He's old and can't get around easily by himself. His kids all work out of town, and since we live in the same neighborhood, I thought I'd come with him to help him get some exercise. I nodded and said I had other things to attend to, so I left first. Maybe I was too nervous, or maybe he didn't even notice himself, but inside that transparent pocket was a pink keychain. But what old man who plays chess would use such a girly keychain? And that keychain belonged to our next-door neighbor, Hazel. A single man and woman, talking about accompanying an old man before there had to be something fishy going on. Because of this, I even recorded a video and sent it to my mother-in-law. After all, having evidence makes it easier to speak up. She's always at home picking on me, saying my husband must be blind to have married me. She goes on about how Hazel is smart and capable, beautiful to boot, and excellent at housework, unlike me who just eats and then lies down in the bedroom. Well, Hazel's parents don't care about her either. She's left to fend for herself, born to be a servant, only able to do some chores neither pretty nor useful. Today, with both eyewitnesses and physical evidence present, I'm eager to see how she'll defend Hazel this time. After Grandpa came back, the house was eerily quiet. Before, the two of them would argue at the drop of a hat. Suddenly, Grandma asked, "Where did you go today?" "To the hospital, of course. I even saw my daughter-in-law there." "Don't believe me? Go ask for yourself." Grandma deliberately ignored those words and glared at him fiercely. "Who did you go with? What did you do there? When did you leave?" "That old man I played chess with. Who else could it be? Who else do I even know?" "Stop being so paranoid all the time." I watched Grandpa trembling nervously from the side, feeling a faint sense of satisfaction. This couple really does like Hazel. One wants his son to be with her, the other wants to be with Hazel himself. No wonder they're family. I shook my head and opened the photo album. "Dad, whose keys are this pink and soft-looking?" Grandma, who's always been close to Hazel, immediately recognized them as Hazel's keys. Seeing this, Grandpa didn't bother to deny it any longer and confessed everything. He said something about Hazel being unwell at home alone, and since he happened to go downstairs today, he kindly offered to take her to the hospital for a checkup. Mother-in-law looked at him suspiciously. "Really? Then why did you have to take her to the hospital in the south of the city? Have you done something to betray me? And why lie to me, saying you were just accompanying that old man for chess?" Father-in-law patted his chest. "By heaven and earth, I haven't done anything wrong. She said she had relatives over there, so I just took her to that hospital. I was actually going to accompany that old man in the neighborhood at first, but then he said his son had come back. That's when I ran into her halfway. I know how much you usually like her, so I intended to help her out. If it weren't for you, I definitely wouldn't have taken her there." The shadow of doubt on mother-in-law's brow instantly lifted, and hearing father-in-law's thoughts about her, her face lit up with a smile. In the blink of an eye, she fixed me with a malicious glare. "You really are a vicious woman. Knowing you don't like Hazel, you still went ahead and concocted a story about your father-in-law and her. Your intentions are so sinister. I'm calling my son back right now to divorce you. Do you think everyone is as cruel as you?" I had planned to set a trap for my father-in-law, but unexpectedly, I ended up hurting myself. When my husband heard about this, he hurried home and told my mother-in-law, "Mom, we've been married for so long. You keep bringing up Hazel every day. She didn't do it on purpose. Everyone has their temper. She was just angry for a moment, so don't take it to heart." I muttered quietly on the side. Clearly I wasn't wrong. Everyone in this neighborhood knows there's something going on between Hazel and my father-in-law. But because of my mother-in-law's nagging, it's better not to say too much. But not saying it doesn't mean it didn't happen. Mind your own wife. Now your sights are set on your dad. If this gets out, it'll be both embarrassing and a joke. I don't know which wife is like you, but your judgment is clearly off. Forget it. I won't say more if I do. You'll just call me an old nag for talking too much. As she spoke, my mother-in-law didn't forget to tug at her sagging skin, muttering, "You shameless one, but I still have some dignity." Knowing I was in the wrong and lacking any solid evidence, I didn't argue further and turned to walk toward the bedroom. A woman's sixth sense is never wrong, especially when my father-in-law was lingering reluctantly by the door, and on that door were two bold characters: maternity ward. Only pregnant women are allowed in there, so it was almost certain that Hazel was expecting. Hazel had been single-mindedly trying to get close to my husband, but since we were so loving and my husband had no interest in her, she never stood a chance. That's probably why she set her sights on my father-in-law instead. Perhaps I was too tired and fell asleep. The next day, I hurried off to work. As I was going downstairs, I saw a familiar figure. It was Hazel. She was walking towards me, and the summer wind was blowing quite strongly. She wore a loose dress, but the gusts lifted the fabric, clinging tightly to her clothes. I could see her slightly rounded belly. See, she really is pregnant. Her eyes flickered nervously, and she didn't seem very eager to talk to me, but I was determined to catch up with her. I took her hand proactively. "Hazel, you look great lately. Has something wonderful happened? By the way, I haven't seen you out these past few days. Are you okay at home? Feeling unwell or something?" She didn't expect me to show such concern, and a flicker of doubt crossed her eyes. "I'm fine. Maybe I've just been sleeping well lately. My complexion has improved." That made sense. Pregnant women often feel sleepy, and it's normal. After we turned away, we each went to work. At dinner, my mother-in-law kindly ladled out a big bowl of chicken soup with 2 drumsticks and instructed my father-in-law to deliver it to her. Father-in-law wore a face full of joy, teasing mother-in-law, "TSK, TSK, TSK, you treat her better than you treat me." Mother-in-law shot him a glare. "You should see who you are and who she is." I snorted, speaking sarcastically, "Why don't you just all be one big happy family then?" Mother-in-law, overjoyed, thought I had finally decided to let go and divorce her son. She immediately wiped her hands on her apron. "Fine, then go get a divorce now. I'll have my son marry Hazel. If you divorce my son, I promise I won't treat you badly. I'll give you a big sum of money." I shook my head. "Mom, you still don't get it. There's not just one man in the family, Dad, isn't that right? And besides, I'm with my husband, and he hands over all his salary. That's way better than your measly pension that could starve someone to death. I'm not going to lose out on this deal." We're all adults here, and between the lines it was obvious I was hinting to mother-in-law that father-in-law had feelings for Hazel. But mother-in-law didn't quite catch on. "Stop stirring up trouble. Your father-in-law is not that kind of person. I bet you're just jealous of her, which is why you're spouting nonsense. Sometimes, people really need to have some shame." I nodded and smiled. At first, when I found out Hazel was pregnant, I felt a bit conflicted, but coming home to see the situation like this, I was curious to know what would happen if Hazel decided to keep the baby. It didn't matter after all. I wouldn't be the one losing face. When I said this to my mother-in-law, she wavered a little. As soon as my father-in-law left, she immediately followed him, ready to catch them in the act. Unfortunately, my father-in-law and Hazel didn't make any further moves. This only made my mother-in-law more convinced that I was a liar, and she took to telling my story as a joke to the neighbors whenever she had the chance. But I didn't care. After all, my mother-in-law would soon learn the truth. That day, my husband called me saying he was coming to pick me up. Curious, I asked what was going on, and he said my mother-in-law had some great news to announce. I was full of shock. What big happy event could there possibly be in her dull, uneventful life? After entering the house, I saw Hazel leaning in a corner of the sofa, chatting and laughing with my mother-in-law, while my father-in-law was busy in the kitchen. My husband also noticed something was off and asked in confusion, "Hey, Dad, what made you decide to cook today?" My mother-in-law, cracking sunflower seeds and clapping her hands, said, "You'll find out soon enough." When the dishes were ready, she helped Hazel sit at the main dining table. I wore a face full of displeasure. When my parents came over for dinner, they had to squeeze around the coffee table to eat. Why should she get to sit in the dining room, and at the main table no less, just because she showed up? "You get down, I'll sit there. You can't sit there." Hazel was about to sit, but hearing me say that, she was caught in an awkward spot, neither standing nor sitting, and could only cast a pleading look toward my mother-in-law. "Sit. If I say you sit, then sit." I slammed my hand on the table. "No way. The property deed has my name on it, so I call the shots. Letting you into this house for a meal is already the greatest tolerance I can show you. Don't be ungrateful." My mother-in-law clutched her chest and said to my husband, "Look at the fiery, unreasonable wife you brought back. She even has to fight over a seat. If your father passes away first and I become paralyzed, is she going to make my life miserable?" My husband shook his head. "You said it yourself, this is her seat. I earned the money to buy the house and put it in her name, so she is the lady of this house. She can do whatever she wants." Hazel took the loss silently, tears the size of beans streaming down her face, looking pitiful enough to break anyone's heart. The two elders couldn't even eat anymore and kept trying to comfort her. "If you don't want to eat, then go back to your own home. You come here to mooch off our food and still have the nerve to cry." Maybe my temper was a bit sharp today. My mother-in-law didn't know what to say for a moment. After comforting Hazel a bit, she started eating her own food quietly. My husband asked her with concern, "Mom, didn't you say there was some big happy news? What is it?" As soon as the topic came up, my mother-in-law got excited. "Hazel is my goddaughter from today onwards, and also, she's pregnant. From now on, she'll be living and eating with us." Pregnant? My suspicion was indeed correct. Pregnant? If I'm not mistaken, Hazel didn't even have a boyfriend. How did she get pregnant so quickly? Did they register their marriage? My mother-in-law shot me a glare. "Young people's business. Why do you care so much? Her being pregnant is a good omen." I sneered. "What good omen? Someone like her, with no self-respect or self-love, getting pregnant out of wedlock, what good omen could that be? What if when the baby's born, the biological father denies it? Or worse, she's labeled as the homewrecker who broke up someone's marriage or love? That would be a real joke." My father-in-law sat nearby, restless, sweat beading on his forehead. As I spoke, I glanced at him. "Don't you think so, Dad? The fan's on, so why are you so hot?" He shook his head. "Let's eat quickly. After we finish, we can rest. It's been a tiring day." I looked at my mother-in-law, whose eyes and heart were full of her, and I scooped some food into her bowl, asking, "I don't mind if you let her eat at our house, but if you let her live here, that's not acceptable. Let her pay rent at the previous rate, or else she can get out of our house." My mother-in-law slammed the table and stood up. "Don't get greedy, Hazel. Just because my son likes you, you dare to target us like this. She's only been pregnant for a short time. Can she go out to work? She barely has any money. If you kick her out to live on the streets, if anything happens to the child, I won't let you off even in the afterlife." I looked at my mother-in-law, whose face was flushed red, and laughed. "You're so worked up. Could it be that the child is yours?" My mother-in-law pointed at my face, gasping for breath. You. Before she could finish, she grabbed Hazel and stormed out the door. The door slammed so hard it echoed, as if venting her dissatisfaction. After resting for a while, my husband leaned beside me as I analyzed everything for him word by word. He nodded, as if it made some sense. The people in the neighborhood are all sharp, more or less. They can see some tricks. I just pity my mother-in-law, who doesn't know what's really going on. Now she still wants to move in. We have no blood relation with her. Giving her a meal is an act of kindness, not an obligation to let her live on our turf. Besides, this house is mine, so of course I have the final say. After their walk, my mother-in-law was enthusiastically tidying up the room for her, even telling her to treat it like her own home, not to be shy, and to speak up if she needed anything. I stood by the door and knocked politely. Hazel, you should move out on your own. Don't you have relatives working at the hospital in the south of the city? Surely they're closer to you than we are. There's no need for you to live with us. Our home can't accommodate such a big presence like you, especially since you're pregnant. Living with your relatives means if anything happens, someone can lend a hand. Here, it's inconvenient with just 2 elderly people and my husband, and I only come back at night, so it's up to you. I had made it very clear that she was not welcome, but she stubbornly refused to leave, shamelessly insisting that she wouldn't be a burden to us. My mother-in-law also eagerly took my hand, saying that once Hazel's husband came back, she would naturally leave. Leave or not. If you don't leave, I'll call the police. You're trespassing. As soon as she heard the threat of the police, Hazel softened and shook her mother's arm. Forget it, Mom. I'll go stay with my relatives for a while. Don't make things difficult for my sister. It's all my fault. Seeing this, my mother-in-law's anger flared up. Fine, call the police then. I bet you'll just end up rebelling. If it weren't for my son working so hard all this time, would you even be living in this big house? I rolled my eyes at her. You know it's your son, not you. Besides, your son married me, get that straight. You didn't even figure out whose seed is in her belly before bringing her home. One day, don't come crying when you get hurt. My husband walked out of the bedroom, still groggy-eyed. Mom, this is Hazel's own business. We shouldn't interfere. She's an adult now and needs to take responsibility for her actions. When the baby is born, it won't call you grandma, and you won't gain anything from this. So why bother? Seeing that her own son had been opposing her at every turn ever since he started dating and got married, the mother-in-law felt a deep sense of bitterness. Without a word, she took Hazel and headed outside. The father-in-law noticed the tense situation. Outside, lightning flashed and thunder roared as the heavy rain poured down. Watching them leave, he followed after them. I nestled into my husband's arms, unable to sleep. My voice hoarse, I whispered, was what I did not quite right? Was I too harsh? He rubbed my head. There's nothing wrong with that. It's really their own business. In the middle of the night, someone was knocking on the door irregularly. My mother-in-law walked in looking exhausted and collapsed onto the sofa, muttering angrily about my father-in-law. They're teaming up to bully me. When did those 2 scoundrels start sneaking around behind my back? Serves her right that the child in her belly was lost its karma. I was wondering why he suddenly changed. Turns out he's been fooling around outside and even got her pregnant. It seems my suspicion was correct. My mother-in-law probably knows what happened. I've told you long ago, fooling yourself, you deserve it. My mother-in-law, full of indignation and with no one else to vent on, took it out on me. How dare you? If Hazel had married my son, would all this have happened? I nodded. Yes, you're absolutely right. Didn't you want her to be part of the family? She's carrying your father-in-law's child in her belly. Now you have another son. Mentioning that child made my mother-in-law furious. She rushed forward, grabbing my hair and cursing me. You seductress, it's all your fault, you jinx. What kind of spell did you cast on my son? The sting of her slaps landed again and again on my hands. I glanced at the leftover food on the dining table that hadn't been cleared away, then dumped it all over her. All the greasy leftover food was smeared across her face, blurring her vision so she couldn't see what was happening right in front of her. I shoved her outside the door. "Don't come looking for me again. I let you in thinking you'd admit your mistakes and change, but I didn't expect you to turn around and bite me. I could raise a dog for years, and it would still wag its tail at me. Raising you is just like raising an ungrateful wolf." The door slammed shut with a bang. My mother-in-law kept pounding on the door, begging me to let her in. I pretended not to hear. Besides, her son was sleeping like a pig, impossible to wake no matter how much he was called. Feeling exhausted, he had fallen into a deep sleep. The next day, my husband looked at the mess scattered all over the floor and asked me what had happened. He looked at me with pride, as expected of my wife, impressive. Truly, a love-struck mind is the best dowry a man can have. After all, my husband owes them nothing. They had taken care of his cousin since childhood, pouring all their love into someone else. As for my husband, he was left to fend for himself, having faced all kinds of storms and hardships. Nowadays, bringing the elderly couple back was only to repay them for giving me life, nothing more. My mother-in-law waited outside the door all night. When we finally opened it, her fingers were white and swollen from the rain, her lips colorless, and she kept sneezing, as if she had caught a cold. Hey, don't come in. What if you, a sickly person, infect my husband? He suffered too much as a child and can't afford to get sick. She frowned deeply. What do you mean? At first, it was because when I first came to meet my in-laws, I had taken a grueling 12-hour flight, suffered from the change in environment and drastic temperature differences, and caught a relentless cough right after landing. My husband advised me to rest and recover before visiting them, saying there would be time later. I didn't agree. After all, there's no reason to keep elders waiting, and besides, this little cold was nothing to worry about. But on the very day she came in, she embarrassed me, saying I wasn't allowed to enter. It was only after my husband coaxed and pleaded for a long time that my mother-in-law finally agreed to let me in. She even told me to eat over to the side, her words dripping with disdain, as if she feared I might infect them. My mother-in-law moved her lips and said, "I'm your mother. That doesn't mean anything. Just because you say it doesn't make it true." Seeing this, my mother-in-law lay down right there in the hallway, throwing a tantrum and rolling around, hoping everyone passing by would notice her. I opened my phone and started recording a video, zooming in on her face to capture her spoiled, stubborn expression. Then I caught the eyes of others and said, "Sorry, if she's blocking your way, just step over her. She's an old woman we don't know, and I have no idea why she insists on hanging around our doorstep." In just a few words, I sent them away and closed the door. After a long time, when there was no more noise outside, I peeked through the peephole and saw that my mother-in-law was long gone. Life finally felt peaceful. My father-in-law called me, bluntly asking to borrow money for the child's medical expenses. I immediately blocked him. Pay your own child. He's an adult, and not thinking about the consequences is one thing, but he thought he could cover it up, fooling everyone. In the end, the child caused trouble before even reaching a stable stage, and this child isn't something I can save just because I want to. This is the result of his own recklessness. My mother-in-law hasn't come looking for me these past few days either. To celebrate my newfound peace, I even took a few days off to eat, drink, and enjoy myself at home. But staying cooped up at home for too long felt uncomfortable, so I thought about going out for a bit. Our home is on the 3rd floor, and since the elevator is usually busy, I normally take the stairs. Just a few steps outside, a cold chill and a foul stench hit me head-on. Serves you right. Who told you not to respect me? You need a lesson. Don't you remember I'm your mother? I sniffed carefully. It was sewage. This whole mess was clearly their own fault, yet now they were acting like I was the culprit. My joints cracked as I twisted them. I threw down my bag and pressed her head into the remaining sewage. After all, she wasn't young anymore and wasn't as strong as me. Several times she tried to speak and beg for mercy, but I forced her to drink more sewage to teach her a lasting lesson. I only got sewage on my clothes, but she swallowed it directly. Calling you Mom is out of respect. If you dare pull any more tricks, it won't just be drinking sewage next time. My mother-in-law patted her chest, panting heavily. The foul water dripped down her graying hair, leaving the hallway a complete mess. I went back inside, washed myself thoroughly, and then called my father-in-law to ask how things were going. He thought I was willing to lend him money and kept thanking me, but I firmly told him I wasn't going to lend him a cent. He sighed on the other end of the phone. Sigh, I just want a biological son of my own. When he said that, wasn't my husband his son? The line was silent for a few seconds before he started talking to himself again. That son is hers with her ex-husband. He has nothing to do with me. When my father-in-law said this, I understood. No wonder my husband was so pitiful as a child, unloved and uncared for. It was because of this. Then what does this child of yours have to do with me? You have nothing to do with my husband, so I have even less to do with you. When are you going to take your woman away and stop bothering me? Handle your own affairs properly. It seems my husband probably still doesn't know he's not my father-in-law's biological son. No matter what, I will keep this buried deep in my heart. No one loved him? That's fine, I will love him well. In the end, the child still couldn't be saved. It was already on the brink of death, and with the previous months being unstable, this outcome was somewhat expected. This child was never meant to be connected to my father-in-law. I don't even know what came over the two of them, but they actually went on local TV together to attack me. On television, the two of them colluded shamelessly, listing my supposed crimes, accusing me of causing the death of their goddaughter's unborn child, and neglecting the two elderly people, leaving them exposed to the elements outside. For a time, public opinion painted me as an unforgivable villain. Many neighbors pointed fingers at me, even colleagues at work looked at me coldly, and the elders in the community cursed me every time they saw me, calling me a heartless wretch. A righteous person fears no crooked shadow, a straight foot fears no twisted shoe. I did nothing wrong, so naturally I was not afraid. I posted the truth about the goddaughter and my father-in-law on the internet. The internet is not just for my in-laws. I use it too. And in fact, I use it better than they do. My father-in-law was the first to come forward and post a video to counterattack me, asking what evidence I had, just making baseless accusations out of thin air. He even wanted to send me back to the police station. Well, that's true. After all, the child had already been miscarried, and only those involved knew the nature of the relationship. If they didn't want to produce evidence, then it was a lie. I released a few indecent photos, and the rumors collapsed on their own. Two graying bodies intertwined, with the clear faces of two people. One was my father-in-law, and the other was Hazel. They thought I didn't know, but in reality, I knew everything. Due to the nature of my work, I had to arrange my time flexibly. Sometimes it was midnight, sometimes 3 or 4 in the morning. Hazel lived right next door, and sometimes when I went out to work, I could hear indescribable sounds coming from their house. The young couple was so passionate they even forgot to close the door. Out of kindness, I was about to close it for them, but unexpectedly, I heard my father-in-law's voice. For a moment, I thought I was imagining things after all. The two houses were so close, and my father-in-law had a habit of getting up at night. But when I heard Hazel sweetly calling his name, my blood ran cold, and my legs felt like they were filled with lead. At first, I kept telling myself it wasn't my father-in-law. But the scene before my eyes told me I wasn't mistaken. I took a few photos just in case, and it turned out they came in handy at that moment. My father-in-law was left speechless. Only my mother-in-law clung to me tightly, refusing to let go, insisting that I had hired someone to use Photoshop to frame them and ruin their reputation. Sharp-eyed netizens took the photo for verification, and all agreed it was real. The two were left speechless, getting blasted online like a sieve, and they deleted their accounts overnight and disappeared. My husband pointed at my dark circles. Get some rest. It's so late. Forget about them. Let's just live our own lives. After sending off my in-laws, Hazel showed up. In a way, they really were one big family. She lived right outside my door, spreading out a quilt and not caring what anyone thought of her, just stubbornly staying put. I didn't want to argue with her, so I called security and told them there was a loiterer who needed to be removed. But Hazel pulled out her homeowner's ID, leaving security helpless and at a loss for words. If she wanted to sleep there, fine, let her. I had plenty of ways to deal with her. I sprinkled some itching powder where she sleeps and threw some rat poison powder as well. Lately, the rats have been rampant, so a little treatment wouldn't hurt. In the middle of the night, I heard Hazel couldn't sleep, itching all over, tossing and turning while cursing me at the door. She even said the child in her belly wouldn't let me off. As long as she didn't leave, I would torment her every day. Then I grabbed the dripping trash can and walked it over to her, the dirty water trickling down onto her face. She looked at me with a twisted expression. You're sick. Me sick? The sickest one is you. Who in their right mind sleeps outside someone else's door for no reason? Even so, she still didn't leave. I kept dumping the garbage I collected every day right at the doorstep, and since it was summer, everything rotted quickly. If she wouldn't leave, she'd just have to endure it. One day, she suddenly disappeared. I thought she had left, but it turned out she had brought some shamans and Taoist priests to the door to perform rituals, saying they wanted to rid the people of harm and destroy a scoundrel like me. I looked at those shamans and priests, all mysterious and shady, with no proper credentials, babbling nonsense about which sect they belonged to. After taking her money, they poured all the dirty water on me. I snatched their props and threw them into the trash bin. She's scheming and deceitful. Does a person like that deserve to go to hell? You guys better deal with her first. And let me make it clear, I'm a staunch materialist. None of this can hurt me. If I catch you cheating and deceiving again, it won't just be about throwing things. I kicked her blanket aside. Don't block the entrance to our home and cause trouble. You only lost this one child. There's no need for all this. You're blind and careless, climbing into my father-in-law's bed, shameless beyond words. She was so angry she couldn't argue back, so she swallowed her bitterness in silence. Besides, I'm not the main culprit here. I have no reason to pay such a painful price for them. The one who can't control his lower body is my father-in-law, not me and not my husband. After the neighbors in the community learned roughly what had happened at home, they didn't dare gossip in front of me. If anyone started, I would make sure they wouldn't have a moment's peace. That day, my husband told me to come home early, saying that no matter how much he tried to stop them, my parents insisted on coming in. I knew my husband was a soft-hearted person. My parents had done too many bad things to him, but as soon as they said something like he was wrong or shouldn't have done that, he would immediately soften. I stormed home in a fury and saw the two of them sitting on the sofa. Perhaps it was the recent hardships and exposure to the elements outside, but they looked even more worn and weathered. How could you bear to come back? Weren't you going to report me and take me to court? Go ahead, who's stopping you? My parents stammered, apologizing and saying that they were old now, their minds not as sharp, unable to turn corners quickly. Only you two are old and slow-witted. Look at the other old men and women in the neighborhood. Are they like you? What exactly are you here for this time? Just go back to the countryside. I and he have already been more than fair to you. Don't cause any unpleasantness. No one will be happy then. My mother-in-law was also unwilling to back down, demanding that I pay them $100,000 a month for them to return to the countryside. Otherwise, they would stay with us forever. $100,000? What a lion's share. I knew they came to me with no good intentions, just as I thought. I picked out their clothes from the wardrobe and threw them in front of them. Pack your things and get out now. $5,000 a month plus your pension is enough for the countryside. If you keep bargaining, there won't be anything left. My father-in-law opened his mouth to say something, but I shot him a sharp look. $3,000, and if you make a fuss, that's it. My mother-in-law patted my back. Don't be mad. Don't be mad. 5,000 is 5,000. Isn't it enough for us to leave? I watched the two of them stagger out, carrying those few pieces of clothing one gust of wind could have knocked them down. The matter passed, and life went on. Occasionally, there would be some storms, but fortunately, there's always a rainbow after the rain. My husband called me, saying that my father-in-law had been taken to court. I thought my husband had somehow developed a pang of sympathy and decided to help my father-in-law, but he just sighed. Serves him right. He should have thought about the consequences when he did that. That Hazel got nothing. She's definitely unhappy and wants to confront my father-in-law for a showdown. Now look, she's dragged herself into it. Rape charges can land you in jail for years. I cursed that old bastard in my heart, still not behaving at his age. Maybe I was too agitated because the curse actually slipped out loud. No man is a good thing. He grabbed my hand tightly, pouting, I'm a good one. Coincidentally, the court date was set on a weekend. The nosy neighbors in the community, always eager for some drama, naturally wouldn't miss it. They decided on the spot to follow along and watch my father-in-law's spectacle. In court, the father-in-law was not willing to back down, insisting that Hazel was willing and that he had spent so much money on her, bought her so many things. You shameless woman, you were the one who seduced me first. What right do you have to sue me? Hazel threw caution to the wind, looking at him without a shred of dignity. It's only because you have money and no biological children of your own that I stayed with you. Who knew you were such a loser, stealing money from your wife? She's so frugal every day, yet you steal from her to spend on me. Now you can't have me, and even your own wife doesn't want you anymore. Serves you right. The two of them cursed each other shamelessly in court, completely ignoring the law. Only after calming down for a long time were they willing to talk things through properly. In the end, Hazel lost the lawsuit, but the father-in-law didn't come out unscathed either. He still had to pay Hazel a portion of money as compensation. After all, the child was kept in the end. After watching the whole farce, I turned to the father-in-law and said, You really are vigorous for your age. Even grandma isn't as relentless as you. It's okay not to have your own child now, but you won't have one in the future either. Mother-in-law looked at father-in-law, her face full of disappointment and tears. It turned out she had been deceived far more than she realized. Not only did she scold him relentlessly, but she also lashed out at him from all sides, beating father-in-law until his face was swollen beyond recognition. Father-in-law wanted to fight back, but he knew that if he did, there would be no chance left between him and mother-in-law. So he could only endure it. Watching this was quite satisfying to me. Father-in-law was exactly the kind of scoundrel who was never content, always eyeing what wasn't his and still feeling it wasn't enough. It was clear that Hazel's mind wasn't on father-in-law as a person, but on his money. She was truly starving. After this incident, father-in-law, mother-in-law, and Hazel had no face left to live in this neighborhood. The couple returned to their hometown, and this matter became the talk of the town. Since my in-laws liked my husband's cousin so much, they later chose to rely on him. But now the cousin has already risen to great heights and doesn't even regard those two old people. They were casually scolded and sent away. As for Hazel, the internet never forgets. This matter was dug up again and again, and no company is willing to hire someone with such poor character. As for my husband and me, without anyone else's interference, our days were simple and smooth, free of troubles, just time and life belonging to the two of us. The annoying people and problems were all resolved, and all those unhappy memories had completely faded away.